Hi guys, it's Sandy here again from Salmon Fishing Holiday Scotland. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about a age-old conundrum. Which is better, nylon or fluorocarbon? And that has probably been giving anglers sleepless nights for years and years and years. And actually whether there is potentially a role for both. So for years and years and years, nylon or copolymer material has been a firm favourite for anglers for leader material, especially when fly fishing for salmon. The old-fashioned nylon seems, and always has been, really reliable, stands up well to stress and abrasion well, and it's also reliable when it comes to like tying knots, especially if you're wanting to use two flies with a dropper. However, the more modern fluorocarbon is becoming more and more popular with anglers. And manufacturers that produce fluorocarbon say that it's almost invisible in water. It's much thinner for the equivalent breaking strain compared to nylon. So on the face of it, you'd think, well, it's a straight choice. Why would you not use fluorocarbon instead of nylon? But actually, when you think about it, is there a role for both when it comes to salmon fishing? So if you take nylon to start with, well, it's been around for decades, been really, really reliable. There's many different brands on the market. Personally, myself, I cannot see past Maxima. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's really, really reliable. And hardly ever, for me personally anyway, has ever let me down. And another big bonus is that it's significantly cheaper than fluorocarbon, which can be an important factor for many anglers if they're doing a lot of fishing. So probably nylon is absolutely fine in 90% of situations. And you could say that that's because in most situations when salmon fishing, especially when the water's high, in say in the early spring and autumn months, stealth tactics aren't required. And this is definitely the case if you're fishing one of the larger rivers in Scotland, like the Tay, Tweed or Spey. Because early in the season and then in the autumn, often the water temperature is quite low. You're using sinking lines and heavy tube flies. And I'll give you an example of this. This is just an example of a tube fly, so a heavy tube fly. And in these circumstances, there is no discernible benefit, I feel, to use fluorocarbon because presentation isn't absolutely key. And it's not as key as it is during the summer months. Fish aren't as easily spooked, and with heavier, thicker nylon, it's sometimes easier to turn over a tube fly when casting. As we've already mentioned, like nylon is more robust in most cases than fluorocarbon. And in the past, and I'm sure other anglers have done so as well, they have landed a fish and they've looked at their nylon and it's become quite frayed. Maybe where the fish has gone behind a rock and frayed the nylon. And therefore you would have to say, well, certainly I feel that nylon is like more resistant to stress when compared to fluorocarbon. Also, when it comes to summer rivers, especially rivers in the Scottish Highlands, many anglers use two flies, so a dropper, and this involves connecting two bits of nylon together to make the dropper itself. And I've found that when you're making a dropper knot, that invariably nylon is more reliable and better material than the equivalent breaking strain of fluorocarbon. In the past, I've lost fish when fishing with a dropper with fluorocarbon, and hardly ever this has been the case when I've been using nylon. So in most situations, you'd have to say, like, that's it's not an issue in terms of like nylon being a lot more reliable. However, in many ways, fluorocarbon, you could say, I mean, it's been around for a long time now, but you could say it's a sort of new kid on the block. And there's no doubt, that it can almost feel invisible in the water, especially in the water column. So is there a role for fluorocarbon? Well, actually, I think there is. So in the height of the summer, when the water is like really, really low and very, very clear, and you're using tiny, tiny, tiny flies, then using fluorocarbon could be quite beneficial. And often at this time of year, with the water being clear and if it's really, really bright and you've got bright overheads, then the fish can be quite spooky and they can see line and they can see anything above them on the surface of the water. So in those circumstances, having a leader material that's almost invisible in water can absolutely be of great benefit. Another situation where fluorocarbon can be of benefit is when you're using tiny, tiny wee flies. So we're talking about size 16s, size 18s, which are often used in the summer in really, really low water. And I've got an example here. So this is like a size 18. So you can see compared to my fingernail how small that fly is. Now, if you're using thicker leader material, often such small flies won't appear lifelike in the water and won't move as well. And therefore, using fluorocarbon in such circumstances, which is thinner, much, much thinner for the equivalent breaking strain, can make the fly appear much more lifelike and more mobile. And this can often be the difference between sort of success and failure. So, and another thing to take into account, at this time of year, generally the fish are smaller, so during the summer months, so it's more likely that you're going to be catching grills, and therefore there's less stress put on the leader material. So therefore, again, you could probably get away with using fluorocarbon. So I suppose, like, coming back to the question, nylon or fluorocarbon, if you're considering using fluorocarbon for leader material, then it is worthwhile having a look at the characteristics of the pool that you're fishing itself. So if it's a pool with lots of snags and also lots of like rocks or submerged branches, then it is worthwhile bearing in mind that if you hook a fish and then the fish goes behind the snag, then you may struggle to land it with fluorocarbon. And then that can often lead to an unhappy ending. So therefore, you might opt to use nylon instead. So I think overall, when you think about it, when it comes to leader material, every angler who salmon fishes has strong opinions. Most are either in one camp or another. And probably, when you think about it, this is dictated by the experiences they've had in the past. Personally, and I'm not saying that I'm right, but in most situations, standard nylon like Maxima, I feel, is more than adequate for the job. However, there are special cases where stealth tactics are required, usually during the summer months or usually when it's very low clear water. And in those circumstances, fluorocarbon can be the right choice. So therefore, in my opinion, nylon 90% of the time does the job, but it's always worthwhile having a spool of fluorocarbon in your tackle bag, just in case. So that's it, guys. Please leave your comments at the bottom of this video and any questions that you may have. And tight lines to all. And in the summer months, have a think. What do you prefer, nylon or fluorocarbon?